When the black woman displays her USSS badge, the cop who is laughing in court freezes. Imagine a crowded courthouse in the center of Washington, D.C., with tension in the air. A stoic black woman sits on one side, her eyes displaying a mixture of resolve and a secret agony. A haughty policeman stands on the other side, sneering at her with eyes that sparkle with confident superiority. There's a lot of gossip in the gallery. There is something strange about this case, as if the truth would reveal all of the preconceptions present. The bigoted cop's derisive smile vanishes in an instant when she produces a badge, an official U.S. Secret Service credential, in one stunning moment. The great facades of Washington's historic buildings were illuminated by the pale morning sun as it slowly made its way down Pennsylvania Avenue. Automobiles sped through rush hour, dodging nervous bystanders and the sporadic tourists taking pictures of the imposing buildings that serve as the backdrop for American democracy. A local police car idled near the White House on the corner of 15th Street, its lights whirling red and blue in silence. Officer Dean Haskins watched folks hurrying by while leaning on the hood and drinking lukewarm coffee. After moving to the city, Dean, who was born and reared in a small Virginian town, had a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't used to D.C.'s fast-paced environment or its diverse people. He was used to simpler living. But he was annoyed by more than simply the city's quick changes. A darker aspect of him was nourished by the sense of power he felt behind his badge. There was something exceptionally weighty about Dean's pessimism on this particular morning. He scanned every face in the crowd, suspicious of anyone who appeared even slightly out of place. Then he saw her, a tall, elegant black woman in a clean blue suit, moving swiftly along the pavement. She appeared composed and self-assured, looking straight ahead. Her confident stride, however, seemed strange to Dean's cynical and practiced eye. Perhaps it was the subtle racism he held from his childhood, or perhaps it was the bias of a large city cop. However, he was unable to let her pass without interfering. Heading along a side street close to the White House security fence, she turned the corner. Dean threw away his coffee cup and climbed into his cruiser without thinking twice. He crawled after her, following her like a predator pursuing its victim. The woman noticed the police cruiser approaching up behind her as she looked over her shoulder. Her eyes flickered with worry, but she didn't stutter. She ignored the officer's skulking presence and just proceeded with purposeful elegance. Her anguish caused the edges of Dean's mouth to twitch with enjoyment. He saw it as a little reminder of who was in charge on these streets. He rolled down the passenger window and came alongside her a moment later. He shouted out, "Ma'am," with that distinct tone of strained civility in his voice. "Would you mind coming over here for a bit?" She stopped, regarded him calmly, and then walked on as if she hadn't heard. Dean's pride stung and his chest clenched. He gave a brief slap to the siren. "Ma'am, I told you to come over here," he stated again, his politeness fading. The abrupt slowdown caused the cars behind him to honk in displeasure, but he ignored them. At last, the woman came to a halt, let out a deep breath, and looked at the officer. "Officer, is something wrong?" Her voice was calm, and even as she inquired, a hint of displeasure flickered in her dark eyes, but there was no sense of fear or guilt on her face. Dean paused, admiring her elegant blue suit, the pricey watch she wore, and the spotless black pump she wore. She didn't appear to be your typical commuter. His suspicion was heightened by that alone. His thoughts screamed that someone so polished must be up to something. Dean stepped out of the cruiser, put a hand on his holster, and said, "You're walking in a restricted area. Could you please show me your ID?" The woman calmly stated, "This sidewalk isn't restricted. Every day, I take a walk here." They came to a heated stalemate. She didn't show any respect or indication that she would give in to his threats. For a split second, Dean's self-assurance faltered, but he soon recovered, touching his badge as if it gave him unquestionable authority. "Identification," he said more firmly. With a tired sigh, the woman seemed to have seen this situation far too often. Making sure he could see her motions, she carefully delved into her handbag and took out a thin wallet. She withdrew her driver's license, but Dean tensed, half expecting a confrontation. He took a quick look at Veronica Davenport's name. To him, the name had no meaning. He peered at the license, frustrated that he could find no grounds to arrest her, and she waited silently. There are no warrants and no grounds for suspicion. But Dean became more outraged. She is haughty and rebellious. Something else must be going on. He squinted at her and questioned, "Where were you headed?" "Work," she replied plainly. "Where are you employed?" Veronica opened her mouth to reply, then seemed to think about it for a moment. "Rather," she said, "is something wrong, officer, or may I go now?" Dean became enraged. "I'll choose when you're free to depart. If someone is near a high-security area, I have every right to ask them. These days, people are planning all sorts of things." Veronica's cheeks flashed with irritation, but she swallowed a scathing reply. She had already encountered officers like him, folks who carried the badge with an air of unjustified superiority. She was aware of how easily things could get out of hand, particularly if she didn't exercise caution. So, despite her tightened mouth, she made an effort to be courteous. "Well, officer, if that's all, I'd like to continue to my destination," she said. "I have a meeting, and I'm late." Dean took another look at her. The fact that she had the audacity to stand there as if she belonged there absolutely annoyed him. But he had no legal justification for holding her. He detested the fact that he knew that. At last, he nodded curtly and dismissed her. "All right, go ahead," he said. But he whispered, loud enough for her to hear, as she turned to go, "You people need to remember your place around here." Veronica's shoulders tensed as she stopped in the middle of her stride. She refused to interact, clenching her fist in her pocket. Rather, she proceeded with deliberate and respectful strides, as though her very being disproved his bias. With a sigh, Dean got back in his cruiser and drove away. But something bothered him. Perhaps it was her unwavering stare or her courage to confront him. He opened the little notepad he was carrying and wrote her name on it. Davenport Veronica. He had no idea why, but he was definitely not done with her. He had no idea that he had just started a chain of events that would have a devastating effect on both his life and Veronica's. He had no way of knowing that everything he believed he knew about her would be destroyed in front of the entire courtroom when they met again in a few days, in a much more formal environment with far higher stakes. In the U.S. Department of Homeland Security building, next to the White House, Veronica sat in her office 3 days later. She had been an analyst for almost 5 years, and that was her official title. Informally, she had received specialized training and was closely associated with the U.S. Secret Service. Being trusted with delicate tasks that frequently placed her in close proximity to important national personalities, she was by no means a rookie. It was important that she was discreet. Even in her own department, the work required her to keep a low profile. She was reviewing encrypted emails pertaining to a fresh threat assessment that morning. She occasionally looked at the time, recalling the embarrassing encounter with Officer Dean Haskins. It was just another casual act of bigotry in a long series of them, but she had persuaded herself to ignore it. However, something prevented her from burying it. She was still filled with rage at the thought of his mocking expression and the way he had referred to her as "you people." A soft knock disrupted her focus. Gabriel Molina, her co-worker, stuck his head in. Aware of the requirement for confidentiality in their profession, he whispered softly, "Hey, Davenport, you are invited to visit Director Klein's office." Veronica's eyebrows arched. What did he say about it? He has that expression in his eye, though. There's a problem. Gabriel shrugged his shoulders. "Don't keep him waiting, please." After picking up her notes, she headed to the director's office, going along a hallway adorned with pictures of Secret Service personnel who had protected presidents from Clinton to Obama and Lincoln to Reagan. She was still filled with wonder every time she saw those pictures, even after years of service. They served as a reminder of the significant heritage she was a part of. Samuel Klein, the director, was a tall, broad-shouldered guy in his early 50s whose solemn manner softened when he interacted with those he trusted. Veronica could feel the tension in the air as soon as she entered his office. Klein's eyes narrowed and his jaw was fixed. He motioned her to shut the door. He leaned forward over his desk and murmured, "Veronica, I need you to give me an explanation." The Metropolitan Police Department filed a complaint against us regarding an event that happened close to the White House boundary and involved you. Do you recognize Officer Dean Haskins?" In her throat, her heart leaped. "Yes, sir," she answered softly, trying to keep her feelings in check. "He attempted to scare me by stopping me without reason. I gave him my ID, and he released me." Klein gave a solemn nod. "According to the complaint, you were uncooperative and your demeanor interfered with official police activity. You were in a restricted area, the officer says." Veronica's rage flared once more. She took a slow, forceful breath. "Sir, it is untrue. No restricted area existed. The sidewalk was open to the public. All I was doing was going to work." Klein let out a breath. "Davenport, you have my faith." Haskins, however, is exaggerating the situation. He has requested a formal hearing over your behavior. This immediately turns into a departmental issue because you are an agent. We cannot disregard it. "A hearing?" Stunned, she repeated. "For what purpose? Strolling to work?" Klein's gaze grew stony. "You're aware of how these things proceed. It's a political issue. It's intimate. The MPD is pushing it, whatever it is. They're trying to find out if you were breaking any rules. They're most likely looking for someone to blame, or perhaps this cop harbors resentment. In any case, the hearing is scheduled for the following week. The federal courthouse of Barrett Prettyman. We must go." Veronica's lips pressed together. Anxiety, humiliation, anger, and other feelings swirled inside her. Well, she understood. "I'll be present." "Look," Klein sighed wearily as he leaned back. "I am aware of your record. You're among our best. Even though this could only be a bother, I want to follow the rules. We'll take care of it if you show up and give honest answers to inquiries. The last thing we need is for the media to fabricate a narrative about racial profiling in the Capitol or about a Secret Service agent going too far. We must end this as soon as possible and in a clean manner." She took a deep breath, recalling the humiliation she had experienced on the pavement. Even with her expertise and the understanding that she had some authority in her field, she had nevertheless received criminal treatment. Despite her anger at the injustice, she gave Klein a nod. "Indeed, sir. I'll contribute." She felt as though a hurricane was about to hit her when she left Klein's office. She never thought her job would put her on the defense in such a degrading manner. However, Officer Haskins was willing to defend herself if she felt like fighting, even if it meant disclosing more information about her true position than she typically did. Veronica confided in Gabriel later that day. As she explained the problem, he whistled for a long time. Gabriel responded angrily. "It sounds like he's trying to make an example out of you." "Don't they realize you're—" she interrupted, nodding. "That's right. That's why I'm a little uncomfortable. I've never made much of myself." Gabriel sneered. "Now, I'll have to come into the spotlight, if only to defend myself." He's going to have an unpleasant surprise if he believes that lying would help him get a hearing. "We're on your side, and your record is spotless." Veronica smiled a little appreciatively. "Gabe, thank you. I'll need every bit of help I can get." However, she secretly feared the hearing. She was aware of the intense scrutiny she would encounter in that stuffy courtroom. She also expected Haskins to smile smugly when he witnessed her having to prove her own innocence. But she also had knowledge that he did not. She wasn't your typical citizen. As a skilled Secret Service agent, it was her responsibility to enforce the law. She would therefore bring a battle if he desired one. Lawfully, quietly, and with all her remaining dignity. Tension increased in the days before the hearing. There were rumors going around the department. Some questioned whether it was motivated by race. Others whispered of bureaucratic turf battles between federal agencies and local law enforcement. Veronica made an effort to remain composed and concentrated on her daily responsibilities. But she could sense the rage bubbling deep inside, combined with a strong will to see justice done. The skies threatened to rain on the dark and cloudy morning of the hearing. Outside the eve, Veronica was standing. She paused to steel herself from Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse. She styled her hair in a tidy chignon at the nape of her neck and wore a basic black pantsuit that was traditional but professional. She looked up at the towering columns that framed the entrance to the courthouse. She had previously visited, but always as a liaison or analyst on official business. She was expected to explain her behavior today, but she was on the opposing side. There was already a crowd forming, and reporters, who were constantly searching for a story about a law enforcement controversy, took pictures and pointed microphones at anyone who even approached the hearing chamber. A group of social justice activists had also gathered, fearing that this was just another instance of a white police officer engaging in racial profiling. They were carrying placards that said, "Stop racial profiling," and "Equal justice." A pain arose in Veronica's chest. In a way, these were her people, but she was unable to participate in the protest. She needed to maintain her poise and concentrate on the next court case. Muted tension buzzed through the courthouse halls. Veronica made her way through the crowds to the hearing room. She entered and looked around. Although it was a smaller, more private room than a normal trial court, it nonetheless had the same solemnity, with a table on either side, wooden chairs for guests, and an elevated bench for the judge. The lights overhead created a harsh radiance, while the silence inside accentuated every footfall and paper rustle. Officer Dean Haskins was there. With an air of smug certainty, he stood next to his lawyer, leaning against the table. His outfit was immaculately ironed, and the gold badge shone in the fluorescent lights. When he saw Veronica coming in, he let his lips twist into a sneer. He saw this as a victory since it forced her to defend herself in a scenario he had planned and put her in the open. She recognized Elizabeth Chan, a departmental attorney, as her own legal representative. After reviewing the specifics, they had developed a strong argument against Haskins' assertions. Elizabeth had a reputation for sharp cross-examination and was a passionate litigator. Veronica felt comforted by her presence. Elizabeth responded, "Miss Davenport," and motioned for Veronica to take a seat next to her. "Everything is ready. We'll do this quickly." Veronica nodded as her eyes strayed to the back row, where she could see Director Klein, her boss. He nodded in agreement, indicating in silence that the agency was fully behind her. She had another surge of relief. Judge Stephen McPherson arrived at exactly 9. Everybody stood. The judge, a guy in his late 60s, was known for being fair, but also for having a strict policy against any courtroom drama. He eyed the 2 tables in front of him, adjusted his spectacles, and sat down behind a bench. He tapped the folders in front of him and added quickly, "Let's get to it. This hearing concerns a complaint against U.S. Agent Veronica Davenport, brought by Officer Dean Haskins of the Metropolitan Police Department. The Secret Service, unauthorized presence in a restricted area, and interference with police business are the charges in the complaint." He looked up, first focusing on Haskins. "I know you have legal representation. Officer, are you both prepared to get started?" The wiry, salt-and-pepper-haired lawyer for Haskins stood up and nodded. "My client has prepared statements, Your Honor." Judge McPherson's gaze shifted to Elizabeth and Veronica. "What about the defense?" Elizabeth got to her feet. "Indeed, Your Honor, we are ready and have substantial proof that Agent Davenport did not commit any violation." The judge appeared to be content. "Then let's move forward." Officer Haskins was the first to testify. He gave his version of events, describing how he had noticed Veronica strolling close to a restricted area, how she had resisted his commands, and how she had turned hostile. He occasionally added dramatic flair to the narrative by introducing lines like, "I feared for my safety," and "she seemed ready to escalate the situation." He stopped often, staring at the judge as if he were a virtuous victim. Veronica's blood boiled as she listened. The falsehoods were obvious. She had offered her license without reluctance that day, displaying nothing but poise. The tension grew in the room. Sensing the difference between Haskins' claims and the real events they had heard rumors about outside the hearing, reporters at the rear exchanged glances. To face cross-examination, Elizabeth stood up. Her tone was strong but cool. "You say my client was in a restricted area, Officer Haskins. Could you specify the precise zone in question and provide formal proof that it was marked as limited on that particular day?" Haskins tightened visibly. The categorization of that neighborhood around the White House is frequently susceptible to change. "We were suspicious," Elizabeth cut in. You're saying it might have been restricted. Do you have a signed memo, an order, or a barrier that says it was off-limits to pedestrians? Haskins took a swallow. Everyone knows it. Law enforcement personnel are well aware that those places may be restricted at any time. Elizabeth squinted her eyes. However, you don't have any hard evidence that it was blocked that morning, do you? Haskins' jaw muscle trembled. He reluctantly acknowledged that there was no official proof. Elizabeth looked across at the judge. A copy of the official street closures for that time and date, as provided by the Secret Service and the Metropolitan Police Department, is what I would like to present as evidence, Your Honor. She passed papers. Neither Pennsylvania Avenue nor 15th Street are mentioned as being limited on the particular morning. The documents were accepted by Judge McPherson. He frowned as he flipped through them. Would you mind answering, officer? Haskins stumbled. Although I behaved in good faith, it's possible that I made an assumption based on previous closures. I think the defendant was disobeying my commands because she was not helpful. Elizabeth's voice became tense. Did she just exercise her right to continue on a public sidewalk? Or was she being uncooperative? Was she unwilling to provide you identification? His body shifted uneasily. In the end, she did give me her ID. However, what was her attitude, officer, were your presumptions? After shooting back, Elizabeth turned to face the judge, leaving the point unanswered. Observing Haskins's predicament, the judge nodded. The hearing was not yet over, but the officer's allegation was rapidly losing ground. Haskins's lawyer attempted to turn things around. In the heat of the moment, my client, a seasoned police officer, cannot be expected to remember every detail of the city's limits. He was taking action to maintain safety. It is still the case that Miss Davenport obstructed his inquiry, impeded by the walk to work. Elizabeth's eyebrows arched as she spoke. This is the exact type of overreach that results in constitutional infractions and wrongful detentions. There was a rumble of excitement in the gallery. Leaning forward, journalists scrawled on their notepads. Perhaps this is not merely a local tale. It had all the makings of a larger scandal, particularly if there were claims of racial profiling. Haskins, feeling trapped, took a different approach. He added that she was evasive when I questioned her about her motivation for being there. Perhaps this wouldn't have gotten out of hand if she had identified herself to me sooner. Elizabeth looked across at Veronica. Come to the stand, Agent Davenport. Every attention in the room was on Veronica as she sat in the witness chair and took the oath. Recalling her training, she clasped her hands at her lap. Keep your cool. Remain true to the facts. Keep your emotions under check. She was led by Elizabeth through the entire affair. Haskins' position suggests a threat, the sidewalk, and a request for identification. Veronica's heart thumped, but her voice remained steady. She explained to the judge that Haskins had no legal justification for holding her, and that she had in fact produced her license. She also brought up his final remarks. You folks must keep your location in mind. There was silence in the courtroom. Haskins' lawyer shifted uneasily. The judge scrunched his brow in worry. Elizabeth continued. Why didn't you declare yourself a Secret Service agent at the time, Agent Davenport? Veronica inhaled steadily. As I was under no duty to do so. I was on my way to work, off duty, and not the subject of any investigation that would have required me to provide my federal credentials. What's more, I wasn't doing any official Secret Service work. I provided my state-issued ID as requested by Officer Haskins, which ought to have been enough. After giving a nod, Elizabeth faced the judge. I think this makes Agent Davenport's compliance clear, Your Honor. She is not required by her employer's internal standards to reveal her whole status during an unconnected stop, particularly if she has done nothing illegal. Just then, Officer Haskins chuckled mockingly from his table, a brief, mocking laugh that echoed across the silent courtroom. People stared at him with disbelief. The man might have been charred by the judge's glare, but Haskins persisted despite it, his tone brimming with irony. He growled, "Come on. We all know she's simply using the race card, but she's still acting innocent. Normal. She's blaming me for carrying out my duties. This wouldn't be taking place if you had just stated that you were employed by the federal government. You have to make it a racial issue instead." Before he could finish, Veronica went inside her jacket pocket, pulled out a little leather case, and flipped it open in one seamless motion. Her official U.S. passport was shining there under the fluorescent lights, emblem of the Secret Service. It had an electrifying effect. The gallery let forth a shocked gasp. The cameras flashed. Officer Haskins' face went completely white as he understood the gravity of what he had just spoken, and the judge's eyes grew wide. As everyone in the room gazed at the gold shield and the credentials that came with it, they confirmed that Veronica Davenport was, in fact, a special agent of the U.S. Secret Service tasked with protecting the security of the country's most important leaders. The silence that ensued was as dense as a storm of thunder. Veronica's voice was clear and determined as she talked. "Nobody is using me as a pawn. His unfounded accusations are the reason I'm here. And I'm sick of being treated like a second-class citizen just because I'm a black woman at the wrong place at the wrong time." The level of tension increased to a nearly intolerable level. For a moment, Haskins' eyes were fixed on the badge, and he could not speak. He swallowed forcefully, as if he knew he may lose this battle, and lose badly. Every detail was captured by the relentless clicking of a reporter's camera shutter somewhere in the back. That famous emblem shining like a testament to truth in the face of injustice. The steely resolve on Veronica's face, and the perspiration on Haskins' brow. The balance of power changed at that instant. Veronica was no longer defensive. She was no longer merely another black person who had to defend her presence. As a federal agent, she was ready to enforce the law, even against those who donned the badge yet disregarded its tenets. Officer Dean Haskins' meticulously crafted deception started to come apart. For him, the worst was yet to come. A collective, suspended breath appeared to ripple through the courtroom. In order to enable the impact to settle, Judge McPherson permitted a lengthy period of silence. Then he cleared his throat gently and called for order. "Agent Davenport," he said officially, but his tone softened with a note of sympathy. "Stay on the stand, please." "Counsel, you can go on." Elizabeth's voice echoed in the silent air as she nodded and approached her customer. "The credential you just presented to the court, Agent Davenport, is evidence that you are employed by the U.S. Secret Service. For the record, could you confirm the length of time you have been in that position?" Veronica looked at Elizabeth. "Yes, I have 8 years of experience as a special agent. I had previously worked for the Department of Homeland Security as an analyst. I regularly work on danger assessments for presidential events because I have a high enough security level." The courtroom echoed with a chuckle of surprise. The breadth of her expertise was unknown, even to those who had speculated more about her past. Officer Haskins shifted in his chair uneasily. Elizabeth continued, "Do you frequently walk along Pennsylvania Avenue in plain clothes, given your training and security clearances?" Veronica gave a nod. "Always. Actually, it's a component of my regular commute. It's also a familiar path because I regularly travel to the White House compound for work." Elizabeth's voice was determined as she turned to face the judge. "Agent Davenport obviously had every right to be in that location, Your Honor. Furthermore, she was not required to reveal her federal status during an off-duty stop since she was a Secret Service agent, especially if she had a valid driver's license. There's no doubt about her honesty. The reasons behind Officer Haskins' lies, however, are..." Judge McPherson looked Haskins in the eye. "Do you have any thoughts on this new information, officer?" Haskins' lawyer sprang up fast, trying to cut his client off before he could say anything. "Let me remind the court, Your Honor, that the issue at hand is whether my client had a valid reason to stop Ms. Davenport. The fact that he was unaware of her federal job does not rule out the likelihood that she was in a restricted area." The judge, however, was not at all persuaded. He shot back, "But we already proved there was no restriction in place that day. This indicates that your client's main defense for the stop, beyond a mere suspicion, was unfounded." It was evident that Haskins was tense. He gave Veronica a scowl that was a mixture of humiliation and rage, as if he were punishing her for telling him the truth he had never anticipated. Seeing her advantage, Elizabeth went on, "Furthermore, Your Honor, it seems that Officer Haskins' choice to stop the defendant was heavily influenced by her color. As she was leaving, He particularly said something offensive. You people need to remember your place. It's more than just unprofessional. It implies racial prejudice. Once more there was a general silence, then a chorus of piercing whispers. Haskins's expression grew gloomy. He appeared on the verge of losing his temper. However, the judge prevented the situation from getting out of hand. Rather, he addressed Elizabeth and gently rapped his gavel for order. Let's keep the hearing on course, Miss Chan. Even though I recognize how serious these accusations are, Ms. Davenport is accused of interfering with police activities. First, let's resolve that. Elizabeth bowed her head. Your Honor, of course. Judge McPherson gave Veronica a look. Did you interfere with Officer Haskins's ability to do his job that morning, Agent Davenport? Did you not follow his legal directives? No, Your Honor, replied Veronica. I complied with his request for my ID, answered his questions, and only departed when he instructed me to do so. The magistrate turned back to Haskins. Do you still maintain, officer, that Ms. Davenport obstructed your lawful police duties in light of everything that has been presented? Haskins paused, his jaw clenched. In his ear, his lawyer murmured urgently. Haskins finally let out a sigh through his teeth. His voice was hardly more than a whisper as he mumbled, No, Your Honor. With a nod, the judge recorded the admission. He then repositioned his glasses. It seems that the allegation has no merit. The charges should be dropped at the conclusion of this hearing. Veronica felt a wave of relief. Although Elizabeth put a comforting hand on her shoulder, the judge's look suggested that the case was far from ended. He looked at Elizabeth again. Do you or your client have any counters to file regarding the officer's conduct, Miss Chan? He said. I inquire because there are serious claims of racial bias, and if Agent Davenport wants to file a complaint, that can be handled separately. With a quiet question in her eyes, Elizabeth looked at her client. Veronica made a snap decision. She addressed the judge directly as she rose from the witness chair. I don't want to unnecessarily increase legal tensions, Your Honor. All I want the record to reflect is that I was harassed and stopped without cause. Nevertheless, I'm certain that the Metropolitan Police Department has the right processes in place to deal with this. I reserve the right to take additional action if they don't. Judge McPherson's head bowed. All right. I then declare that Agent Davenport's complaint has been dismissed. We've adjourned this hearing. With a rap, he dropped his gavel. The courtroom instantly erupted in whispers, with reporters demanding statements and lawyers hastily compiling their documents. Veronica let out a breath, relieved but also with a twinge of resentment at how nearly she had been set up. Officer Haskins sat motionless at his table. Veronica caught a glimpse of Director Klein standing and silently filing away, probably to deal with any departmental ramifications. Elizabeth led Veronica to the door, but before they could go out, a group of reporters gathered and began questioning them about what had happened that day. Elizabeth spoke to them with well-honed grace, making a succinct statement. The court acknowledged today that the accusations against Agent Davenport were unfounded. We are happy with the result and won't speak further. Then, to protect Veronica from more media abuse, she led her away. Nevertheless, Veronica couldn't help but give Haskins one last look. His face twisted in rage as he spoke animatedly with his lawyer. She questioned whether he would ever consider how his biases had brought about this embarrassing incident, or if he would just hold onto the anger and accuse her of bringing him to light. A strong sense of finality descended as the crowd filed into the hallways. However, Officer Haskins was only about to face more repercussions. It seems that karma was going to call, more forcefully than he had ever anticipated. Word of the conclusion of the hearing had already spread like wildfire by the time Officer Dean Haskins returned to the precinct later that afternoon. The office was silent when he entered, the uniform still immaculate but smeared with the unseen marks of loss. He could feel eyes on him, both interested and disapproving. Officers with whom he had previously joked casually now avoided looking him in the eye. His shoulders were stiff as he walked directly to his desk. There stood a half-full cup of stale, cold coffee from the morning. In an attempt to calm the rage brewing inside, he smashed his palms down on the metal surface. The fact that he had lost was terrible enough, But the courtroom spectacle, her covert identity, the press attention, and the judge's humiliating smackdown made him shudder with bitterness. Lieutenant Marcus Feldman, his commanding officer, arrived in a matter of minutes. Feldman had a lofty stature and a cool, collected manner. A mixture of frustration and despair filled his gaze as he turned to Haskins. Dean discreetly gave me an order in my office. Ignoring the sidelong glances, Haskins followed. Feldman crossed his arms over his chest and shut the door behind him as he entered the little office. Okay, let's listen to it. What on earth took place in court? In an attempt to conceal his annoyance, Haskins slid into a chair. He whispered, "They brushed the complaint aside. She's Secret Service, it turns out. She made me look like a liar by flashing her badge." Feldman's forehead wrinkled. "You allegedly stated it was a restricted location, which was obviously untrue, and you filed a complaint against a federal agent without doing any research. Tell me if you have a logical explanation." Haskins stirred uneasily. I had grounds to believe that something was amiss. How was she suspicious? Feldman didn't buy it and interrupted. Because she was a professional-dressed black woman strolling close to the White House. Bristling, Haskins glared up at his supervisor. She was acting like she was above the law and giving me attitude. Feldman squeezed the bridge of his nose and let out a breath. "We've been working together for a few years, Dean. I am aware that you enjoy pushing limits, but this is a nightmare for PR. Allegations of racial profiling are already plaguing the city. The headlines now feature your name prominently. A black Secret Service agent is harassed by a cop. The superiors are enraged." Whitening his knuckles, Haskins clutched the chair's arms. "How should I proceed? Offer her a public apology?" His voice was heavy with venom as he spat. Feldman studied him intently. "It's bigger than that today, but it might be a beginning. The department must look into your behavior. A probe is being launched by Internal Affairs." Haskins felt the words strike him like a kick to the stomach. Affairs Internal. That meant something to him. All of his earlier complaints, files, and actions would be closely examined. The unstable edifice of dubious omissions and partial fact he had amassed over the years might collapse at any time. With a desperate tone, he added, "You can't be serious, Lieutenant." "Well, I believe to be right, I did." Feldman gave a headshake. "You were obviously mistaken, and the department is now bearing the consequences. You're on administrative leave with immediate effect. Give your gun and badge in." Haskins' face was devoid of color due to the finality of the order. "Go." "But I'm a good cop," he repeated. Feldman interrupted, his voice tinted with disappointment. "This is Dean. Now turn them over." With his heart racing, Haskins released his duty belt, allowing the gun and holster to fall with a dull thump onto Feldman's desk. Soon after, his badge glinted in the fluorescent light. Without them, he felt exposed and stripped of the power he had possessed for years. The nightmare persisted no matter how many times he blinked. Feldman nodded curtly at him. "As soon as the investigation is finished, you will be informed. Till then, return home." Unsteadily, Haskins got up and moved from the office into the main bullpen. Formerly respectful co-workers stayed away from him. While some gave empathetic glances, others gazed with hardly disguised disdain. Already, the rumor mill had done its work. The majority were aware of the main points of what had happened in court. It wasn't shocking to many. Haskins was known for pushing the boundaries and attacking those he thought were suspicious, especially if they didn't resemble him. His jaw clenched as he picked up his belongings and left. There was no pride in donning the uniform this time. It felt accusing, as though all the officers in the room were whispering to him, "You brought this on yourself." A gloomy drizzle has begun to fall outside. Unmoored, he stood with his hair dripping wet at the edges. He was aware that public opinion was shifting against him. The department had recently separated. They couldn't do much more, according to even his lawyer. Seething, he thought of the woman. In the Navy outfit, that woman. He couldn't tell whether he was more angry at himself for not doing his research before making the complaint, or at her for having the gall to confront him. He was tormented by the image of her serene face, the way she had broken his case and calmly shown her badge. He thought about going back inside and maybe confronting someone to correct the record. However, there was no record to correct. He was apprehended. The drizzle became a chilly downpour. Uncertain of what was ahead, he trudged out with his shoulders bowed. A plan started to take shape in a little, trivial part of his thoughts. Perhaps he would find a way to drag her along with him if he was going down. A rumor, a smear campaign, anything to restore his damaged pride. However, as he would soon learn, that route only brought more misery and instability. By no means was karma finished with Dean Haskins. She tried to unwind at home that night. She poured some chamomile tea, lit a lavender-scented candle, and turned on the television in the hopes of finding a pointless program to divert her attention. However, it appeared as soon as she flipped to the local news channel. The screen was filled with her own face. The host talked about Officer Haskins' administrative leave and the repercussions at the Metropolitan Police Department. They praised Veronica for speaking up against discrimination and played cell phone footage from the courthouse steps where a few people chanted. With a groan, she turned off the television. She thought, "I never asked to be anyone's symbol. All I wanted was to work quietly." However, another insight came to her while she sat in the soft light of her living room lamp. Despite her reluctance to share it, perhaps her experience could lead to a discussion about structural problems. Perhaps there could be some positive effects if at least a few people challenged their prejudices. She sipped her tea, allowing the warmth to calm her. She still had a persistent feeling of anxiety in the back of her mind. Rolling over meekly was not Officer Haskins' style. He had been hateful and determined. She questioned whether further trouble was in store or if their routes were really cut off at this point. Officer Dean Haskins sat with a half-empty bottle of bourbon on the coffee table in the living room of his little suburban apartment, replaying the day's stories about him. The TV was set to a local channel. His disdain grew as he watched, each comment feeding the fires of his rage. The media coverage has gotten more intense every day since the hearing. Public indignation surged. There were hashtags all over social media denouncing police racism. Outside the MPD headquarters, demonstrators gathered to demand more severe disciplinary measures than a simple suspension. It was becoming less and less likely that Haskins would return to active service. He took another drink of bourbon, seething. A friend on the force texted him when his phone rang. "I don't know if you heard, but amen. IA is searching for your files in search of trends." "Apologies." With a yell of rage, Haskins threw the phone across the room, causing it to clatter on the floor. Patterns, he considered. They will accuse him of racism. They would discover his past grievances. Here and there are a few altercations. Minor accusations that were dismissed because there wasn't enough proof. The department would not risk burying anything this time, with the media spotlight shining brightly. The scuffed wooden box containing old family photos caught his attention as he turned off the television. He opened it and started looking through his childhood photos, reminiscing about a simpler era. There was a time when he thought that everyone appreciated and honored heroes who wore badges. Where did everything go wrong? He was reminded of Veronica's composed, stubborn demeanor in the courtroom. She seemed to see right through him based on the way she had looked at him, as if she understood the intolerance he attempted to conceal under a law and order symbol. His thoughts swirled, conjuring up revenge fantasies. He pictured enlisting the help of old acquaintances and fabricating a tale to portray her as dishonest or unworthy. Alcohol had dampened his reasoning side, but he knew it was suicidal. She had an immaculate reputation as a Secret Service agent. He would only be further buried by any untrue allegations. So he cursed the day he ever saw her and wallowing in his own misery. The strain increased daily. He tended to keep his fury within his flat and rarely left. Rumors began to circulate. I had found more dubious stops, primarily involving black drivers. Online forums, local talk radio, and the newspapers all mentioned him. According to some publications, he is a compulsive racial profiler and a serial abuser of authority. Haskins attempted to shift the responsibility elsewhere, but he was ultimately held responsible. A few men from his former area, some of whom had their own hidden prejudices, encouraged him to keep going despite his loneliness. They told him things like, "We need tough cops like you because the city has gone soft." However, when juxtaposed with the mounting evidence against him, the remarks sounded hollow. In the meantime, Veronica attempted to return to her regular activities in a more tranquil area of Washington, but each step she took outside her apartment was tinged with persistent anxiety. She alternated between driving and using the metro from a different station for her commute. She even changed the way she walked, occasionally looking over her shoulder. She was realistic about the dangers that any well-known person could encounter, not crazy. She saw a dark automobile a short distance behind her one evening as she was leaving the DHS building. She abruptly veered into a busy shopping area, out of alarm. Before the sedan sped off, she had a glimpse of a somewhat familiar face behind the wheel. Her heart was racing. Was it just a coincidence, or had it been one of Haskins' friends? She made the decision to talk to Gabriel Molina about her worries. She described the unsettling sensation that someone might be observing her while having coffee in the break room late at night. Gabriel stirred his coffee and scowled. "Your headline now, Veronica, not just an ordinary agent. If paparazzi or tabloid reporters are attempting to capture unscripted footage, I wouldn't be shocked." Grimly, she nodded. "Though my intuition tells me differently, that's what I'm hoping it is." He gave her shoulder a light squeeze. "Perhaps you ought to spend some time with someone, a family member or friend, till this is resolved." She gave a slight smile. "I'll give it some thought, but I'm trained and armed. I'll be all right." However, beneath her composed exterior, her nerves were tense. She was plagued by the anxiety of not knowing who might be out there. She brought up the issue with her superiors, who, as a precaution, ordered a covert protective detail to watch her for a few days. She was alert, but nothing came to the surface right away. Veronica was working overtime on a sensitive briefing that needed to be completed by dawn one late evening. Except for a few security guards and a few agents on late shifts, the DHS headquarters was almost empty. A cool fall wind blew across the quiet streets outside. She made the decision to get some fresh air shortly after midnight. She rode the elevator down to the foyer, putting her ID badge around her neck. An amiable older man called Rich, the on-duty security guard, nodded at her. Pushing through the revolving glass doors, she entered the clear night. A section of pavement that led to the main road was lighted by the harsh glow of lighting. For a minute, she stood there and took a big breath, allowing the cool air to help her focus. "I can go home and sleep at last," she assured herself. "Only a few more hours." She noticed a quick movement. Her attention was abruptly drawn to a shadowy figure emerging from behind a parked van. She recognized the face even in the poor light, even though the figure was wearing a hooded jacket. Dean Haskins. Her heartbeat quickened. To approach a government structure in this manner, he must be insane. Her veins were filled with adrenaline. She grabbed her phone to summon security, but Haskins stepped forward a few paces ahead with a revolver gleaming in his hand. His voice was filled with anger and despair as he rasped, "Don't you dare. No phone calls." Veronica felt her heart pound. Try not to panic. She carefully lifted both hands. Haskins put down the gun. "Everywhere you look, you see cameras. There is no way out of this." His eyes were bloodshot and his face was drawn. He appeared thinner and more insane than she had recalled. "You're the reason I lost everything," he spat. "My reputation, my career, my badge, and you act like a fucking hero everywhere you go." A cheap-looking revolver shook in his shaky hands as he brandished the weapon. Veronica kept her gaze fixed on his, her training taking over. "Keep him talking is the first rule." Softly but firmly, she said, "You lost everything because of your own actions. None of this was requested of me. The media, the court hearing, it simply occurred." He growled, "Bull. You had the option to ignore it. You could have just identified yourself to me." A wave of rage sliced through her terror, and she squeezed her lips together. "You bothered me without cause. In court, you lied. Haskins, you made this happen." Malice glowed in his eyes, yet there was also a flash of regret. He exuded the odor of booze. He muttered, "I never wanted to shoot you. In any case, my life is over." She felt cold when she heard those words. She briefly remembered all of her defense training at close quarters. She made an effort to subtly change her position, preparing to disarm him in the event that he fired a shot. The question was he bluffing or did he actually mean to kill her? She could hear the distant hum of a car approaching. Simultaneously, the doors of the building opened behind her, and security guard Rich emerged. His eyes widened when he saw the rifle. With the radio crackling in his other hand, Rich said, "Hey, put it down." Haskins was temporarily distracted by the sound and spun around. Veronica recognized her opportunity. Just before he fired, she lunged and knocked the gun to the side. The gunshot echoed down the empty street. The bullet bounced off a street lamp, sending sparks flying. In a mad battle, their bodies collided as they struggled. Veronica had an advantage because, to her training, even though he was taller and heavier, she pulled the revolver from his grasp by twisting his wrist. It hit the floor with a clatter. Another twist, and Haskins fell to his knees, screaming in agony. With her own sidearm pulled, Veronica had him cornered by the time security reinforcements showed up. She had succeeded in taking it out of the holster around her waist. As two armed guards restrained Haskins, she aimed it squarely at him. She was gasping for air and simultaneously felt a wave of relief, dread, and indignation. Panting, Rich rushed up to check her for wounds. "Agent Davenport, are you all right?" She gave a shaking nod. "All okay, just let him in." Haskins moaned, sweat streaming down his face. "Call MPD." He snarled, "You bitch, you're to blame for this." With her adrenaline still pumping, she disregarded what he had said. He was pulled to his feet by security personnel and dragged in the direction of the building's entrance. Police cruisers immediately converged, painting the street with blue and red lights. She made her declaration amid the hubbub. Haskins was taken into custody, placed in handcuffs, and loaded into a patrol car. Arms encircling her midsection, she watched from the sidelines, trying to comprehend that she had nearly been shot. Veronica had a peculiar mixture of relief and exhaustion in the days after Haskins' arrest. She cooperated with the inquiry for hours, providing every detail of the attack. Haskins' intentions were clearly evident from surveillance footage captured by the exterior cameras of the DHS building. There was unquestionable proof against him. Haskins' destiny was set when he was charged with attempted assault with a lethal weapon on a federal official, in addition to numerous other offenses related to his previous misbehavior. The story was reported by the media, but this time the tone was firm. The public sympathized with Veronica and praised her calmness and fast thinking when the disgraced officer attempted to attack the Secret Service agent. Haskins was quickly fired by the MPD due to several infractions and the felony charges he was now facing. Official remarks distanced the department from his behavior and denounced his acts. After completing its investigation, Internal Affairs published a damning report revealing racial bias in his arrests and stops. He would never again wear a badge. Veronica made an effort to maintain some semblance of normalcy throughout it all. She carried on with her profession, attending meetings, assessing dangers, and protecting public figures. She thought about how close she had come to dying in the few calm moments she had. She was reminded by the occurrence of the brutal fact that, when motivated by hatred, even those who have been pledged to protect could turn into the menace. Director Klein invited her to his office one bright afternoon. He was standing by the window with his hands clasped behind his back when she got there. With a faint smile, he turned. He said kindly, "I just got done talking to the deputy director, Agent Davenport. We would want to thank you for managing this whole situation in a professional manner. You acted with respect throughout the complaint and the final altercation." She felt a surge of emotion as she cleared her throat. "I was only doing what any agent would do, sir." "Thank you." He gave a nod. "Maybe, but not all agents would be as calm as you are. A promotion is what we would like to give you. I am the Assistant Special Agent in charge of a new interagency collaboration effort that we are launching. Someone with a history of integrity and tenacity is what we need." Her gaze expanded. The move was significant because it would put her in a leadership role and help close the gap between the Secret Service and other law enforcement agencies. She realized the irony. All of this resulted from an intense altercation with a local police officer. And yet, here she was, charged with encouraging collaboration. She whispered, "I'm honored, and I agree." She gave Klein's outstretched hand a strong shake. "Well done, Assac Davenport. I'm confident you'll succeed." for once, enjoy the sunshine and leave this place. Her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks as she laughed. She sensed the start of a new chapter in her life as she left the workplace. The experience had been terrifying, to be sure, but it had also brought injustice to light. And by shedding that light, she gave herself and a larger system an opportunity to become more open and accountable. We appreciate your participation in this potent voyage of justice and resiliency. Even when the odds appear stacked, Veronica's tale demonstrates how speaking up against discrimination may change people's lives. A racist police officer who believed he had total power was quickly overthrown when a straightforward judicial hearing exposed concealed facts. However, Veronica discovered not only validation, but also a greater sense of purpose in the wake of strife and betrayal. Please lend your support if this story touched you. To show that you oppose injustice, click the like button. Tell us what you think of this incredible courtroom battle in the comments section below. Click the subscribe button if you think more people ought to hear these kinds of tales, to ensure that you never miss an uplifting story of truth and victory. Remember to press the notification bell. I appreciate you viewing, and keep in mind that justice always wins out.